Welcome to the Depth Perception Podcast.
We go in depth about the perceptions and misconceptions of optometry,
which includes the business of optometry,
social issues within optometry,
and life as an optometry student.
Coming straight from Dr. Jasdeep Singh Soni,
Dr. Nadia Afghami,
Dr. Douglas Akiti,
and Svetlana Nunez. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hey everyone. Before you watch this podcast, we as the Depth Perception team wanted to update you on why this podcast was previously taken down. So after some thought and some reflection, we felt that the original podcast didn't really represent how we feel about the whole boards process. We understand a lot goes into the planning of these exams, and we feel like we just wanted to share our personal experiences and opinions on the situation without degrading any specific person or institution out there. We simply want to release, again, a summary of our personal experiences with boards, and we truly hope that you enjoy this episode. Please let us know if you have any questions. Thanks.
Hi guys, welcome to the Depth Perception Pod. We have a very special episode. We're starting a new segment called Emerge and See, and these are really hot topics that are not part of our regularly planned schedules, but we've decided are too important to let slide. So this is our first emergency episode. Today we're talking about board scores, especially focused on part one of boards.
Before we get started, just wanted to give a quick disclaimer that we are four individuals in the field, whether we're practicing or in school, and we're critical thinkers, and we just wanted to start and foster a conversation just for critical thoughts or about what we've seen from our personal experiences or from conversations with other ODs in the field. And we just wanted to put this information out there, and we're open to any questions that may come after. In case you don't know, I'm Jasdeep Singh Soni, and I'm a practicing OD who graduated in 2020.
I'm Dr. Nadia. I am a practicing OD who graduated in 22.
I'm Dr. Doug Akiti. I graduated in 23.
I'm Svetlana Nunez, and I am a third-year optometry student. Okay, guys, so first what we're going to start off with this episode is kind of go through the statistics. And when I mention these statistics, as we know, there's 23 optometry schools, and the passing rate for part one, or to pass part one, you need a 75%. So if we say a school out of 23 didn't pass, that means that school as a whole got less than a 75%, which is like below national average. So if we start off in JD's year, and JD took part one in 2020, right, JD?
Absolutely.
Okay. And at that time, only 4 out of the 23 schools did not meet the 75%. So JD, can you tell us at that time how much was part one?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start off by reading kind of the statistics from my individual program and kind of some of the experiences that I had. In my program from the Arizona College of Optometry from Midwestern, there was 50 people who were candidates for the exam, and 96% of us for part one were passing for my individual school. For part two was 100%, and then part three was 88%. The ultimate pass rate was 98% for my program. Nationally, it was a little bit different. For part one, it was 81.79%, 92.56% for part two, and then part three was 85.9% with the overall ultimate pass rate of 92.2%. So I would say, coming into school and going through that process, for my individual program, we were able to perform a little higher than what looks like the average. And I think that was definitely unique. And as we were going through the program, we kind of knew our year was going to be a little unique. Like the teachers were definitely like whispering at us like the chosen one. Like we were like the Harry Potter of like all the programs that ever came before. And so when we performed that way, the results kind of spoke to that as well. So to see those numbers kind of aligned with what we saw in the school process was very parallel and really like accurate to what I expected we would actually be doing. I think what was successful for our program was that we have like a very small program. Our faculty is very easily accessible because there's like about 50 of us. And I feel like we took some practice tests and had some information given to us about people who had red flags about passing, including myself. And we were able to kind of work with other people in our program and kind of correct some of the things we needed to before taking these boards in order to get such high scores. Which, it's amazing to get 100% for part two and 96 for part one, especially part one being so challenging. So those are some thoughts I have from kind of my experiences.
But JD, I do want to ask, because you were in school and, at this process, literally when COVID happened, So, what do you feel like was the change that you guys went through, school, faculty, and how did it, transpire in a positive way for you guys?
Really good point there, Doug. That's such a unique environment to have a pandemic start. So the pandemic started around May, or let's say March of 2020. I would say that's the fourth quarter towards the end of the year. So by that point, part two, part one were already complete. By that point, maybe there was individuals who for part three needed to complete it. From what I understand, people who were not able to complete part three, they were having to reschedule or go into North Carolina or where they did the boards a little bit later, and that was a little bit challenging of a process with even having to practice. I still remember classmates of mine trying to practice during the pandemic, which is of course challenging. But I would say, fortunately for us, the pandemic for part one and part two didn't really affect us unless you were having to retake it. The
That makes
classes below
sense.
me, however, the day before their boards, the exams were definitely canceled, and so they were prepared to take this test, and then all of a sudden had to wait a certain amount of time, which I can only imagine the anxiety. You're ready to go on this race, and the day before they pull you and you got to wait even longer. I couldn't imagine having to restudy and go through that process.
For your class year specifically, what did they do to prep you? Like, what was your process?
Yeah, and I think this is also dependent on the school as well. For us, at some point, whether it be summer or fall, we had a session with past students who described their thought process on the board's process, and kind of like a, hey, we're trying to scare you, but it's coming from a classmate, not from a faculty, which faculty, obviously, sometimes when they repeat themselves, you kind of tune it out. From there, uh, you have sessions about learning about what KMK and NBEO and Opto Prep and what they entail and what you should sign up for. After that, in fall, you have like your in-person sessions with KMK where they come in person and go through all their content. And we also in fall would take a practice test that would kind of highlight how we would perform on the actual test. In this practice test, our faculty would actually reach out to students who didn't perform well and basically say, hey, like you got to step it up, and would do individual sessions, including from our dean. Our dean personally spoke to me and was like, hey, like you got to step it up, and you got to perform. Essentially, if you don't pass part one the first time, there's a lot of evidence that you may not pass part one again and again and again. And so from there, I would say winter and spring sessions of our classes were more dedicated to giving us free time to kind of study for boards, including spring, of course, right before up to the exam. And so at that point, I would say by that spring period, you're taking practice tests, you're reviewing them, you're consulting with teachers, classmates, how can I do better? And then the exam ultimately comes around the springtime for part one.
Real quick, when, I'm sorry, I don't know if you said, but when did you guys take that practice test?
From what I can
Fall.
recollect, it was around fall
Okay.
time of third year.
And if
Oh,
you
wow.
did you need to have a certain number to be able to take it? Did your school do that?
Good question. We were fortunate. We didn't have some sort of requirement where you have to get a certain number in order to take the actual test, but it was a good test to see, hey, where you would potentially perform. And then we had individual sessions where faculty or professors or the dean would pull us and say, hey, this is what you got to do if you actually want to pass the real one. But no actual requirement. From what I understand, I know certain schools will be like, hey, you have to get a certain score. Is that correct for you
Right.
guys?
No,
Yeah,
did
we
your
have
school
that.
do that?
Yeah, we had that. So, we had an exam that we had to pass. It was like a class, and you had to get a certain score to take boards. Otherwise, they withdrew you from taking it.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
We don't have that.
Go ahead. You don't have that, Sweat?
No. Mm-mm.
For us, we didn't have that when I was there, but they just implemented it now. I think they're trying to utilize it as a way to help the students do better.
Okay. I also wanted to ask JD, you said that you were like red flagged as a student that might not do well at boards. What was that like? Were you like offended how was that brought up to you, and then how did you feel?
I wasn't offended because it didn't surprise me. I would say based on my performance elsewhere ahead of school within classes, it aligned with how I performed on the practice boards test. And so I was appreciative of correct information and motivation to perform well on the tests, and rather have this red flag now than red flag on the actual test. And that did motivate me to start earlier than other students and stay home during breaks. And it did unfortunately work out because of that. I feel like the red flags before is what scared me to performing well on the test. So I do think it's helpful, especially when it's accurate feedback where you're getting from a test. That's the whole point of a practice test, to say, hey, is this reflective of where I actually am at, and what do I need to do to change, or what do I need to do to continue? So I feel like it really did actually do that.
Yeah. And do you remember how much you paid for part one?
Yeah, I do have those statistics for how much I did pay on exams. For part one, I paid about $725.
Say
Okay.
what? 700? Oh my gosh.
I guess
This is
I don't know how much inflation was then, so you can try to see if maybe the numbers align now that inflation's a little higher. But $725, and then part two was $850, and then $1,100 for part three.
okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, all the parts are the same now, I think, right? They're all
Yeah,
cost
they're
the
all the
same.
same.
Yeah, they're all the same. Well, let's keep that in mind. So JD kind of shared a little bit about how things were at his school and what part one was like in 2020. In 2021, we don't have anyone to represent 2021, but I will share the stats. So in 2021, 7 out of the 23 optometry schools, so 7 schools did not meet the 75% requirement.
So
Right.
so those stats, it's not that they didn't meet the requirements. It's like their class in general didn't, like 75% of those people didn't pass, right? Is that how I'm reading the stats, or am I wrong there?
No, I think you're
Mm-mm.
right. I think that's how you say it, right?
So like in like each class size, it's like that percentage of students didn't pass. So like less than 75% of the students didn't pass part one. Correct? Is that how I'm reading it?
From the stats?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. It's kind of a weird thing to say, so I appreciate that clarity, Nadia.
First time pass rate, right? So it's like technically like that amount, like it's not that you need a 75 to pass boards, but the stats that they're saying are based on like the class size and how many percent of those students pass boards.
Yeah. So, when we read this, it's like
Yeah.
in 2021, those students who took part one of boards, out of the 23 schools, 7 schools, their class size didn't. 75% of them did not pass.
Less than 75. Yeah.
Less
Exactly.
than 75% of them did not pass part one.
Right. So that's
We'd
the
have to
stats
make
that
a
we're
real
reading. It's a
emergency
little
podcast.
confusing. It's a little confusing. But I just wanted to say that because I just feel like the wording, some people might be confused. So technically when we're reading like the percentage of people that passed, the amount of percentage is the number of people that like scored below a 75.
Okay.
Does
Okay.
that make sense? Okay.
That makes sense. So the trend here, though, is from 2020 to 2021. 4 schools were in 2020. Now it's 7 schools in 2021 that scored less than 75%, right?
So
Mhm.
75% of their class like didn't pass.
Didn't pass. And then now when we move to 2022, which is Nadia's year, so now we have 13 out of 23 schools. Go ahead, Nadia. I think you worded it better than I did.
75% or like class. I know it's the stats numbers are confusing, but basically, like 70 less than 75% of the classes passed. So the students that took it, like less than 75% of 13 schools, basically. Yeah, that was a crazy time because I think we were the first class that took classes during COVID. So our entire second half of second year and most of third year was all online. So we were all home and doing that kind of thing. I went to Western, so we were just homebound for the most part, and our school did have an exam that we had to pass. We did have KMK, but they didn't come in person. Obviously, everything was like online. And so, you had to be, it was recorded. I don't know if it was recorded actually, to be honest. It might have been. But you had to wake up at 7 a.m. and you had to be by your computer till 6 p.m. or however long KMK was. And you had to do it at home and you had to set it up on your own and you didn't have people next to you. So you were kind of on your own doing your own thing. We didn't have like in-person class sessions. We had everything online. We had all of our boards preps online. So it kind of felt like maybe we were more on our own than the previous classes because the previous classes would actually take a course, and they would like go to the class and then they would get called out. Or Dr. Ramos was in charge for 2020's year, which was like the higher scoring class, and she would like pull people and have them write like all of the antibiotics on the board and that kind of thing. So we didn't get that as a class. We just kind of had to do it by ourselves. We did have the prep course technically. So they would like break it down into subjects, and we'd have to pass mini tests, and it was a class. And if you didn't pass the class, then you didn't pass school and you had to be on probation. So it was a lot of pressure for us to have to do that. And we were taking classes during that time too. I think that we did try to utilize our KMK and things like that a lot. We all had OptiPrep and that kind of thing going, but I think that having an exam that you have to pass is not always the best idea. I know that some schools might think that it's great, but I didn't have that experience. I thought it was a lot of pressure because I had to pass the exam to pass the class, and the exam wasn't boards. And, I should have been focusing that time more on prepping for boards and doing note cards and doing what worked for me than trying to pass this exam that was like 4 hours long on a Saturday that I had to take. And that was a waste of my day because now I'm tired and with so little time left, and we had to do it like every other weekend. There was like 4 exams, and if you didn't pass one, you had to take the next one. And then so just in general, it was a lot of work for us and to have to prep for that. And then we also had midterms every single week before boards. We didn't get any time off. I went to clinic the week before boards. So that was a lot. I think in our class, I'll read the stats. In my year, so we only had 44% pass rate. So that was a lot. That's very low. I think that the people who initially took it in March, they like if you didn't pass the pre-exam, then you couldn't take it. They would withdraw you. They would call up boards and take you out of the testing. And they would cancel your whatever reservation you had at Pearson. So I think that out of the first go, I think only 33 people took it. And I think at the time the stats were like 53% passed. And if you think about it, that was like 15 people.
Wow.
So that was a kind of tragic time. In that year, the national average was a 73%. So a little lower than JD's year, I think, but still on the decline.
Nadia, I do have a question. So, just for anyone who's listening, you went to Western, and I think I got a little bit confused about that class that you were talking about that had 4-hour exams. Was that class like a boards prep class or?
Correct. Yeah, it was supposed to be our like boards prep, but it was a class that you had to take boards. Like if you didn't pass the class and you didn't pass the exams, then you didn't take boards. And you got it was like a class, so you failed a class basically.
Got it. Okay.
In theory, this class should be helping you prepare for boards.
Right. I did not have that experience. I felt like it was worse because I was just stressed. You guys know that I had a year where I had to take a break. And so I was on thin ice already with the school. And if I didn't pass the class, then I got kicked out. Like that was it for me. So for me, it was like not even about taking boards. I was like fight or flight for just passing class in general.
Got it. Yeah.
So just to ask you, like, what would you think would be the alternative to having this class? What do you think would be a better solution?
I think it's different now because it is more in person. I honestly think that having smaller groups is better. Like, if we had houses, I think I've mentioned this in a few other pods, but just have our houses come in like 30 people at a time and just like once a week meet up and be like, okay, this is the things that you need to hit. This is the things that we're going to review by this amount of time. And then like really just have those small group interactions and have the repetition and have this time to like everyone learns a little bit differently, but when you have the time to learn and then you come together, you just, keep spitting out the information. It's really just about like seeing it once and then you might not know it, then you see it again, you kind of recognize it, and then you see it for the third time. And this repetition needs to happen naturally, and you can't be like forcing it like, oh, you got to be ready by this 4-hour exam time. It's just not realistic in that way. And especially being at home, like, we're all trying to navigate the pandemic at the same time. We're trying to navigate being home by ourselves. Like, I hadn't seen my parents in 2 years at that time, so it was a lot of like emotion already in that sense. So, who's to say? I mean, I'm not an educator, so I get that it's hard. But also, I think we kind of mentioned this off pod to like prep us to take the exam before we get to boards. Like some of the material that I would see on KMK, I was like, wow, this is so much easier than why I've learned it. Like, why didn't they break it down this way before? Or like, why weren't we taught this before? This is like the first time I'm seeing these numbers. And I think a lot of time when we're in school, we're just trying to get to the next thing and we're not thinking of the bigger picture. And so a lot of it's like chug and dump, like we're just memorizing and then we have to let it go because we're not remembering like this is all tying together in the end, and this is something we need to know, because they have us under so much pressure to like, you have to pass this class, you have to pass this quiz, you have to do this, and you have to memorize this and that, and we're not really like prepping for boards the whole time we're there. And then we get this short amount of time to just boards prep, right? Like honestly, my boards prep was like 3 months long. Like before that, I was just trying to pass classes and like clinic and things. So
I can see how extended pressure doesn't lead to good results. Essentially, you want to be in a comfortable environment studying, and some pressure is necessary, but then too much pressure over and over is not going to lead to information retaining. So I can see how that can be challenging, especially with the pandemic challenge. Like I think that's where you're seeing it for your class, where it's affecting you, those in-person conversations maybe from faculty or study sessions. So that definitely is challenging. If we did a parallel between us two, right, then you would think when the pandemic's over, it would go back, right? But did that actually happen? Like, what do you think, SV, for how did it turn out after that?
Can you repeat it one more time?
Like we would think if we just look from me to Nadia's and our programs and our years and our classes, that after the pandemic went away, that it would just go back potentially. But the numbers don't necessarily reflect that, right, for 2023?
Yeah, no, they don't. If anything, it didn't go back, it just got worse. So the first time pass rate is decreasing as the cost for boards is increasing from 2020 to 2022, and 2023, which is where we're gonna have Doug jump into the conversation. In 2023, we have 15 now, and this is the recent scores that have come out, the ones that are creating a lot of news on Reddit, Facebook, and Instagram. And the reason why we started this podcast, we're like, we need to talk about this right now, or this podcast episode. And so it's Doug's year where he's taking part 1. So Doug, will give you a moment to share what you want to say. I think the score we wanted to talk about was that how many students took part 1 in 2023?
1,700, something like that.
1,764.
Okay, so 1,764, and I think we did the math earlier that only 62% of those students actually passed part 1. And this is like national average over like all the schools, everybody and all the schools who took part 1.
Right.
This year, 2023, only 62% passed, which is sad. So Doug, can you talk to us about your experience with boards, how your school prepared you? Go ahead.
Definitely. So I went to Inter-American University School of Puerto Rico, and just to highlight the stats for us. So the first time around, we had 29 candidates that took the test, and only 20%, 20.69% of students passed it first go. So it was like the second worst on the list, all the way at the bottom, really bad, compared to, 62% average nationwide. At my school, you guys both kind of mentioned how COVID affected you, but I think my class was one of those as well that was affected by this. Even though it was 2 years after, kind of 1 to 2 years after COVID hit, we were still seeing those effects. Sorry, guys, my phone. We're still seeing those effects because we still had everything virtual as opposed to being in person. We were supposed to have a dedicated class that was for boards review, and essentially, honestly, that never happened. It was on our schedule, but we never met. There was no virtual anything. There was no emphasis on, hey, you need to get through KMK, do this. Everyone didn't. It was just like, figure out your study program, figure out your study methods, and take it when you're ready. Like, we didn't have a test that you needed to take to say that you could pass, but we did have we did have 2 practice tests. For me, I believe those practice tests were in January and February. And so, boards is in March. If you take those in January and February, you take it in February and you don't pass, you're not ready. And from my experience as well, I feel like a lot of people were taking boards just to take it. Like, they knew they didn't pass the practice test, but they're like, hey, let me just take it and see how it goes, even though you didn't get through all of KMK or even half of it. So I was actually a part of student council at that time, and we talked about, like, why are we doing so bad? Like, what can we do better to, like, help the students, like, take things seriously instead of just, like, because honestly, with the practice test too, there were 4 hours, like you guys said. Some people would literally just, like, go in there, be done in an hour. They just, like, BS it because they're like, this is fake. This doesn't count for anything anyways. So it's like, if you're faking on the practice test and you're not trying, what's the point of it? So we actually were a part of the group that suggested that we do implement a certain percentage that students needed if they were going to take it, that they would have to get to be able to take boards. And now but the problem with that is the fact that we still had lots of classes and exams, kind of like Nadia's school. We had exams every week, and we only had a week or a week and a half break, like right before boards, to study. Like that was just dedicated. So I can see a lot of differences between my school and JD's because we didn't have that dedicated time, those sessions dedicated. We didn't have a dean coming to tell you, hey, like, you got to do better, step it up. It was kind of like a free for all. And if you take it, you take it. For me, that first March, I knew I wasn't ready. So I had signed up, and there's a deadline before it's refundable. So I think I backed out, like, I think it was 15 days before, because I knew I wasn't ready and I wasn't gonna waste $1,000 at that time. For us, it was $1,060. So I didn't take it, and then as you see the results, a lot of my peers didn't pass. So I knew it was kind of not worth it. But it's crazy because after that, week and a half of break, then all the exams came right back. So people are trying to study for part 2 / you might be trying to, for me, I was trying to study for part 1 to take it the next available, which I think was August.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, there are so many exams. It's like you can't even study for that then. So for me, I pushed it all the way until the next March, which was last March, or this year, 2023 March. And so I'm at the point where I didn't pass that because I still wasn't ready. But I at least feel better that I didn't waste that 1,000. But the crazy part, like you said, Svet, is as the numbers are going down, the prices are going up. So now it costs $1,380. So it's $320 more for the same exact test when everyone's doing worse. So what's happening? So I guess that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah. I don't know. That just hit heavy. I don't know if it was the numbers or my empty bank account.
JD, you and I have a similar motivation. Maybe not. Let me ask this question. When you were called out, right, you got to meet with your dean and they told you, hey, you're not gonna pass or whatever they had said to you, right? Did you feel like that made you want it more or work harder to get it? Or did you feel like wow, they're picking on me? Or how did you like use that to like motivate yourself to like move to the next level? Because I don't know if you're willing to share, but I don't know. Did you pass part one the first time?
I was able to pass part one the first time, correct? And I do feel like it did lit like a fire under me to step my game up and spend holidays, studying more so than personal time. Like kind of you were saying that flight or flight situation, but I guess it was a more tapered effect because if you find out in fall, it's October, you have till March to figure it out and go through everything multiple times. So I think there was enough time to pivot, but at the same time, it did give a fire when you're having these conversations with your professor or dean one-on-one. And I think that's where I really appreciate that our program was very small. I had even the valedictorian of our class come help and tutor me. I was able to have the resources to succeed, honestly.
What was your class size? You keep mentioning you guys were small. Sorry, Nadia.
It was like 50.
Well, we started off like 55, 60, and it says 50 people took it for a year, so we're around 50. But you get to know everybody pretty well and know who knows what, and even faculty, right? So if you're taking 4 classes a quarter, maybe you have 10 faculty, 8 to 10 faculty maybe. So that's like a 6 or 5 to 1 ratio of faculty to students. So pretty intimate there. But I think things that I'm seeing trend wise is like nature versus nurture, right? It's not just, hey, who are the actual students? It's what kind of situations they're being put in. But I think it's a very nuanced conversation, right? It's not just, hey, like COVID or not, right? Or what school you went to or not. Like we're picking on some trends here.
So yeah, I also was told by my dean that I was not going to pass boards. They said I was going to take it 3 times and not pass, and I was like, you don't really know me, I guess. And so I felt that added pressure, and I really wanted to. I think I've said this before anyway, but I think I said this on another pod when we were talking about part 1. But I used that as like a light to be like, I'm gonna pass. I mean, that, you know, it's not a choice for me, and I'm gonna live and breathe this exam, and that's what I'm gonna have to do. If I have to cry every single day until it happens, that's fine. Because I think that I just knew that I could do it, and I had support, I think, from the previous class, because Libna and Eris and all them, my friends from the previous class, would help educate me and teach me and tell me like, oh, this is the guidance. And I think I was lucky in that sense to have that, and where some people don't have that as well. They don't have that mentorship, and I think that's really necessary, and I was lucky to have that, I think, and have those people supporting me and checking in on me and being like, hey, did you study cornea today, or what did you learn, or you want to go over questions, or if I didn't understand something, I felt comfortable reaching out. And I feel like sometimes the students, especially with this pandemic class, they don't know their classmates as well. You know, this is, Doug, did you start in 2020? You started in like
2019. So I was able to like meet my class, but I saw the change where the classes below me, they didn't know each other. And, you know, they came in and were stuck in the dorms. So you really were just friends with your dorm mates.
Right. So it's like nobody has that support anymore. Like, yes, you know some of your classmates, but do you know like all of them and who's there for you? And I think that this kind of new generation is changing a little bit. And I think schools are finding a hard time maybe navigating that, because most schools probably stick with the same method every time, and it's hard to change. But now that the demographic of our learning has kind of changed, and we've become a little bit more online, especially over the last couple of years, I think that it's just hard to shift. And do you guys think that boards is getting harder, or do you guys think that we're just not as prepared as we maybe used to be?
Actually, I wanted to bring up this point that kind of falls under that, Nadia, and it kind of also relates back to when Doug was talking. Doug was mentioning, you know, schools should teach what is on boards, which I think is one part to this whole conversation, because I think another part is boards not clinically relevant? Because when I think of what I'm being taught in Berkeley, so to give an example, HSV blepharitis. At Berkeley, we're taught anything with HSV, you give the zoster dose, whether it's blepharitis, HSV keratitis, zoster. You always give the zoster dose. Just, it doesn't hurt to give more. Let's just get this treated and done with it. I don't know how you guys feel about that. So like 800 milligrams of acyclovir, whether it's keratitis, whether it's HSV blepharitis. But then we're also told in lecture, if you're taking part 2 or you're taking part 1 and you see for HSV blepharitis, technically the correct answer is 400 milligrams of acyclovir. So you need to circle that one because that's the board's answer, but this is the clinic answer. So it's like, I think in my education, and I'm in my 3rd year of optometry school right now, it's like I have been taught all throughout optometry school, this is the board's answer, this is the clinic answer. And that's what we do all the time at Berkeley. Like all my classmates could tell you, this is a board's clinic, board's clinic. So I kind of wondering, I think from my perspective, and this is just my school, is boards not at the clinic level? Are they just like asking us random things?
For those of you who have taken boards, that's a little more part 2.
I just want to address what Svet said real quick because I just took part 2 like last month, or I guess it was earlier this month. I think they technically are being like getting more clinically relevant. To like answer your question based on part 2, which is more about clinic anyways, I would say yes, they are. But I get what you're saying too, because there are like KMK videos in part 2 that the guy says that too. He's like, well, in real life I would do this, but on boards just choose this. So that's definitely a thing for whatever reason.
So in part 1, so if we think part 2 is clinically relevant, part 1, how would you guys describe that? Like what's part 1?
So
like
part
the
1, I saw what Nadia is talking about too. Think of part 1 as like the SATs. It's just like everything you did in high school. So technically for us, everything you did in school for the first year through 3rd year, but mostly like 1 through 2.
Part 1 is not clinical. Obviously, we have different parts for a reason, right? There's the clinical part, which is part 2, which is supposed to be more of the treatment management side of things. Part 3 is like going through the whole motions of the exam. Part 1 is the nitty gritty. What is the cell layer? How much water is in this layer? How much water does a lens, this and that, and the math, and you have to know like the optics, and you have to know color theory, and you have to know perception, and you have to know like literally everything else. So it's a lot.
But there's another segment that we wanted to do in today's podcast episode is where we read the comments, specifically from Facebook. And so these comments came from somebody who posted, if you don't know, the ODs on Facebook, Facebook group. They posted the current 2022 to 2023 scores, highlighted the 15 schools that, what is it? First time pass rate is less than 75%. And I wanted to highlight a negative comment. We're not going to list any names. We're not trying to call out people. We're just trying to share like some thoughts that others have had, and we've categorized it from negative to positive. So a negative comment that we received was, we need a better applicant pool, more schools competing for the best applicants, meaning lower enrollment standards at some schools. The better schools will recruit the better students and maintain a higher performance. Promoting our amazing profession to the next generation is a start. And somebody else responded saying, this is the correct answer. More schools means schools having to decide between maintaining their budgets and class sizes, and therefore accepting applicants that may not make it through, or maintaining their higher application standards, thus reducing class sizes and budgets. And then with that, there was people commenting like certain schools and like how could this school score less than that 75% and whatnot. So are there any thoughts? Go ahead. Anyone could just share about this negative comment.
I would just say, like, it's important to keep in mind everything in the US or everything in general is a business, right? So if you're no longer making money, you have to pivot and say, how do I make money, whether it be class sizes or board exams. So even when we're talking about NBO practices or prices, there are rising costs all around the US since 2020, whether it be COVID or inflation, whatever it may be. So you have to pay doctors more, expenses maybe more. Additionally, with these class sizes, it is a business to start a school or to have larger classes, whatever it may be. So I would just say, just keep in mind, everything is a business. And that may dictate how things are ran after that, which can be more complex, of course. But feel free to share any thoughts, anyone else.
Any thoughts, Doug?
Yeah, my thing is just people have to remember that, these are numbers, but these numbers are people. And so people went through crazy hardship in the last 3 years. And that can just easily be forgotten when you just look at numbers and stats. So that should just be considered in all of this as well.
That is an important point. They're not just numbers, like you're saying, they're individuals, and we're not even seeing the numbers of how much debt maybe someone has incurred, or what is the path afterwards, or like we do. Maybe there is a large applicant pool, maybe there's not, but are there places of need where doctors are needed, or is there overinflation of doctors? And I think that's a situational answer depending on where you're looking. But with greater demand, there's going to be greater need for our profession. And so it could be that the standards of the tests that we're taking are harder as well. There's just different ways to look at it, what's going on. Obviously, it's not just like an easy simple answer. It's very nuanced.
Yeah.
Svet, why don't you share the last thoughts? Like, how are you feeling going into this part 1 season?
I don't know. I knew this question was going to come at some point, and I think I was one of those individuals that said, I'm going to start studying in the summer and everything's going to be great. And then now it's December, almost January.
Really started Don't worry, I got you. I'm studying too. We're going to motivate each other. Let's get it.
Okay. I need it because I'm like, I don't know if all schools are like this, but I think my school has not gave me any direction on how to study. It was just kind of like, there's a student representative for KMK and OptoPrep, and just kind of follow their emails. We don't have any classes in the fall. This spring, we will have a boards class that is supposed to be like in the afternoon, online after clinic hours. So actually we have like a shorter day of clinic, because in the afternoon we'll have like a boards prep class. As far as I know, the class is not graded, and it's basically like a review session, I guess. I don't know how that goes. I don't know how helpful it is. I'll see in the spring, but that's kind of all my school has given us. We will be taking one class in the spring. I know other schools take multiple classes. So, yeah.
Well, if I was to give you any advice at all on the other side of it, is that comparison is the thief to happiness, and don't tell your own timeline to somebody else's timeline. Don't worry if you haven't started now. That might not have been right for you. Some people like that repetition over long periods of time. I like that over a short period of time. I just like to repeat the same things over and over again in like a 3-month period. And some people were studying for 6 months before me, and some people studied 2 months before me, so everyone has their own timeline. So don't compare yourself to anyone else. Just worry about you and what works for you. You're at the stage in the game where you can know what's successful and your study habits and what you can do to make sure that you pass. And you're going to do it. Got it. You got it. You both got this.
Amen to that. Let's go. Great pod, guys.
And on that, we'll see you guys for the next Emerge and See.
Emerge and See.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Happy New Year.
Hey, guys. Thanks for listening to the Depth Perception Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe on all of our platforms, including
Spotify,
Instagram,
Google Podcasts,
Apple Podcast,
YouTube. Make sure you click that button. Double tap that.
So you guys have no reason not to follow us and tune in to the next episode.
Stop wasting time.
Get in depth.
Subscribe.